Hi everybody, welcome back to English 90. This is our class for Wednesday, the 29th of September, where I wanted to talk a little bit about journals and also our next chapter in our textbook, the first and second steps in essay writing, which happens to be chapter 3 on pages 52 to 84. But in terms of the journals, you can see this in the notes below. You should have already submitted in journal number 1. So I'm in the midst of reviewing those journals and will be returning them to you shortly with my comments, and I will be returning them to your email. And the idea behind the first journal was to get you to read something and focus on creating a summary and then ultimately some sort of a response. And what I had you read happened to be from basically the American Psychological Association talking about mental health in the world of COVID. So I thought that that was very timely. And soon we'll be having more journals due on a more regular basis. Your second journal is not going to be due until the 6th of October. So basically your second journal will be due by the time you would have received feedback from your first journal from me, which is what I wanted. I wanted you to get my commentary, and I'll read it and put an informal grade on it, a checkmark grade, because these kinds of writings are meant to give you practice in reading and in writing. So while I will read for grammar and mechanics and give you suggestions on ways to improve for grammar and mechanics, as well as for content and analysis, just so that you're beginning to get a record of some feedback with some of your strengths and weaknesses in writing, so that you can begin to compile all of that. I didn't want you to be worried about letter grades for this particular journal assignment. You can view it as almost a kind of a practice writing assignment, an exercise to improve your writing. So I'm hopeful that at the ending of the semester, after you've written several journals on several different articles, your writing will be stronger than it was at the beginning of the semester, just through sheer practice. I oftentimes liken it to riding a bike, that while you could read a book on how to ride a bike, ultimately you need to get on the bike and learn how to balance yourself, and that's something you can't learn from a book. You have to fall off a few times. And I think it's the same with writing. While we have a book that gives us suggestions on how to write, ultimately you have to write and make some errors and have me correct them a few times. So that's the idea behind the journals. And throughout the semester, I'm going to be trying to select articles that are related to one way or another to wellness, which I thought made sense in these particularly challenging times. So that second journal, even though it's not due until the 6th, I wanted you to have access to what the article would be. So if there are any eager beavers out there who wanted to begin reading first, but again, I'd like to give you your feedback with the first journal before you submit in your second journal, just so that you can learn from my initial feedback. But this particular article happens to be about sleep and the connection between sleep and the risk of disease. I think it's quite interesting. So you'll see that this article is from Harvard, and I've got the link below for you to access it. And certainly you're free to access it now, but again, I wouldn't want you to be handing in a journal until you've received your first journal back from me with commentary. And what you would do with this article about sleep is what you did with the previous article. Basically, you would write a summary and you would also write a response. And then I would go through it and give some commentary and give a checkmark grade on it. So as we move beyond the journals to the first and second steps in essay writing, you can see that now we're beginning to talk some more about the specifics of actually writing, because in the next couple classes, I'm going to be assigning us our first formal writing assignment when we are going to be talking about the beginnings of writing an essay, though we're not quite there yet. And on page 52 through 84 of the textbook, it talks a little bit about the importance of having a thesis. This is a word you're going to hear frequently in college. Basically, what a thesis is your major point. And a thesis includes a topic as well as a writer's attitude or a writer's position about a particular topic. One of the things that students oftentimes struggle with when it comes to thesis is limiting or narrowing the topic. And on page 54 of our textbook, it talks about that you need to have a topic that is specific enough that you could do a good job with writing about it. And you can see that on page 54, they give us some general subjects like marriage, but that's too broad to write on, or family, that's too broad to write on, or television, or children, or sports. Because the question is, what would you say about marriage, or family, or television, or children, or sports? This is on the bottom of page 54. And then we see how ultimately an individual goes and takes each of those general subjects and makes them a bit more limited. So in terms of marriage, talking about something specific about marriage would be a honeymoon. Or in terms of family, something specific about family would be about an older sister. Or something specific about television would be television preachers. Something specific about children could be disciplining of children. Something specific about sports could be player salaries. But that's still not a thesis. Remember that a thesis is where you take a position on things like honeymoons, or older sisters, or TV preachers, or disciplining of children, or player salaries. And this is where we get the examples at the bottom of page 54, that a thesis about a honeymoon could be, a honeymoon is perhaps the worst way to begin a marriage. So this is a position that reasonable people could disagree with, and that's the point, is that you aren't arguing a fact, but you are arguing a position that could be debated. Or if you were going to put together a thesis about an older sister, this thesis states, my older sister helped me overcome my shyness. And again, what you would be doing is showing how and why she helped you overcome your shyness. Thesis about TV preachers could be that TV evangelists use sales techniques to promote their messages. And of course, what I'm doing is I'm reading, taking the opposite position. Whatever it is you say, I say the opposite. So if you say that a honeymoon is the worst way to begin a marriage, in my mind, what I have to say is that a honeymoon is the best way to begin a marriage. So therefore, you in your writing have to give pieces of evidence to illustrate how having a honeymoon is one of the worst ways to begin a marriage. And I don't necessarily have to agree with you at the ending of your writing, but you have to be able to give enough evidence, and usually we are talking about 3 pieces of evidence at minimum. We're going to be using this number 3 over the course of this semester to try to illustrate how your position is possible. It doesn't even have to be probable. It doesn't even have to be correct. It just has to be possible. So again, to go to a thesis about the disciplining of children, my husband and I have several effective ways of disciplining our children. And again, I'm expecting to read how and why. Or player salaries. Players' high salaries are bad for the game, for the fans, and for the values our children are developing. Notice how easy it would be to take the opposite perspective, that players' salaries are good for the game, for the fans, and for the values of our children. And I should be able to receive both papers from 2 different students arguing these 2 different positions and have them both be equally strong papers, assuming that what the individual is doing is providing enough evidence. Now, in terms of limiting and narrowing the topic, on page 56, they give you an example of how you can limit and narrow that topic through clustering. Now, remember last class we had talked about clustering, a visual way to come up with ideas. And in this particular instance, on page 56, we can see somebody has done a visual, and what they've done is in the central circle, they have physical exercise. And then off of that central circle, they have main points such as weightlifting and dancing and jogging and swimming. And then off of each of those, they have subpoints, that swimming is lots of fun and aerobic, comes with aerobic benefits, but could be expensive because you have to join a pool or a gym, while weightlifting builds stamina and strengthens muscles. So you can see that there isn't one particular way to come about limiting a topic. You can do it through listing, you can do it through clustering, you can do it through free writing, you can do it through outlining, all of the techniques that we had talked about last class. And one of the things to consider is your purpose when you are considering what your thesis is going to be. Why is it that you are writing? Are you trying to, and again, this is on the bottom of page 58, to analyze? In other words, are you trying to understand all of the details and how things are connected to one another? So a thesis, when you're analyzing, could be something like, a home energy audit revealed that we can reduce home heating costs by $500 a year. Your analysis is an investigation, in effect. Or you can explain a cause. How about this? Our home heating costs were high because of poor insulation, drafty windows, and an insufficient furnace. Or you can contrast, show the opposite. For instance, a thesis could be homes using passive solar energy have lower heating bills than others. So you're showing the similarities and the differences between solar energy and traditional energy. Or you can explain an effect. Heating costs or higher heating costs have made architects design more energy efficient homes. So construction has changed because of the desire to lower heating costs. Or to explain a process, how something works. Lowering home heating costs is easy if one follows 3 basic steps. And notice how 3 is oftentimes repeated in these. Or to offer a solution to a problem. People who own older homes should have an energy audit to find ways to reduce heating costs. So this is a solution that's being offered to reduce your heating costs. Have an audit and see what's wrong with your home. Or to classify, in other words, to organize into categories. Heating costs can be reduced by using fossil fuel alternatives, solar, wind, and geothermal. So these are 3 classifications or categories, solar, wind, or geothermal. Or you can explain the advantages of something. Reducing heating costs not only saves money, but it also increases the value of a home, and it helps the environment. Or you can explain the disadvantages. Installing solar panels will reduce the heating costs, but they are unsightly and expensive. So there are lots of different ways that you could go about writing a good thesis. Starting on page 59, going to page 61, they give you some suggestions that you want to make sure that your thesis, again, is something specific. You don't want to just say that your paper is going to be about your parents. What exactly do you want to say about your parents? You don't want something that's too broad, like saying disease has shaped human history. How has disease shaped human history? You want to avoid statements that are too narrow. A hurricane hit southern Florida last summer. Well, yeah, but what position are you taking on that? Or a person must be 35 years old to be elected president of the United States. Again, that's a fact. That's not necessarily a position. And make statements that develop one idea, because if you're trying to develop multiple ideas at the same time, then chances are your writing is going to get very confusing. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that the textbook has a good number of activities. And I had indicated to you that I'm not requiring you to do the activities. I'm just asking you to read the pages that I've assigned. And that the way I would proceed with the activities is that I would briefly review them. And if the activities were covering something that I felt uncomfortable with, I would actually do the activities, in part because one of the ways you learn how to do things is actually through doing them. We talked about all of the different learning styles. And if you are a tactile person, you learn through actually feeling and touching and doing. And certainly if you are doing an activity and you're not necessarily sure how to proceed or whether or not your responses are correct, you can always touch base with me. Occasionally, I will select an activity for all of us to do to use as an illustrative point, which is what I'm going to be doing now. And this is on page 63. So this happens to be an activity entitled Activity 4. And what they're asking you to do in this activity is to basically add a third supporting point to the points that they have provided us. So basically, they've given us one general point, college stressors. And then what we need are 3 supporting pieces of evidence of college stressors. The first they offer us is that grades are oftentimes college stressors. People worry about grades. B, the second way that people worry about college stressors is they worry about being accepted. They worry about making friends. And then C, we have to fill in the blank. There's lots of different ways we could fill in the blank, but off the top of my head, I would think about one of the huge stressors for college happens to probably be they worry about how to pay the tuition. Now, that's not the only stressors that are associated with college. As I'm sure you know, transportation is an issue, time management is an issue, lots of things are issues. But the idea is that you are using three pieces of evidence at minimum to support a particular position. And we see this played out as well when we're asked to use specific details on page 64 through 65. And rather than just giving us a list, we have the beginnings of a piece of writing, but it's much too general. And on the bottom of page 64, we're given a paragraph that states, some of the other patrons are even more of a problem than the theater itself. Many people in the theater often show themselves to be inconsiderate. They make noises and create disturbances at their seats. Included are people in every age group, from the young to the old. Some act as if they were at home in their own living room watching TV. And people are often messy, so that you're constantly aware of all the food they're eating. People are also always moving around near you, creating a disturbance and interrupting your enjoyment of the movie. So basically what we have here is somebody who is writing about the difficulties associated with going to the movies, the hazards associated with the movies. The thing is that the support, the pieces of evidence are not as specific as they could be. For instance, we're first told that many people in the theater show themselves to be inconsiderate. They make noises and create disturbances in their seat, and included are people in every age group, from the young to the old. Some act if they were at home in their own living room and watching TV. But contrast that to this. Little kids race up and down the aisles, usually in giggling packs. Teenagers try to impress their friends by talking back to the screen, whistling, and making what they consider to be hilarious noises. Adults act as if they were at home in their own living room and comment loudly on the ages of the stars or why movies aren't as good as they used to be anymore. So, and this is on page 65. And you can definitely see that the use of specifics makes the writing come alive, and it makes it much more persuasive, especially for a reader who, again, has to take the opposite position. And furthermore, if you think about the second piece of vague support about the hazards of movie going, we were told people are often messy. So you're constantly aware of all the food they're eating. Contrast that to this. And people of all ages leave tacky remnants of candy on the handrests, stick gum on their seats, and drop popcorn tubs or cups of crushed ice and soda on the floor. Again, this is much more specific. You can visualize what's being done. It's one of the reasons why reading is usually more challenging than watching a movie, because when you're reading, you have to supply many of the details. And the more details the author supplies you with, the easier it is to read. And again, that's what you're trying to do, is that you're trying to create a piece of writing that is easy to read. And again, think about the very last piece of vague support that we were given in the small selection I read to you. People are always moving around near you, creating a disturbance and interrupting your enjoyment of the movie. And contrast that to people also cough and burp and squirm endlessly in their seats. They file out for repeated trips to the restrooms or concession stands, and elbow you out of the armrest on either side of your seat. Anything that you can do to be vivid, anything that appeals to the senses, anything that is a specific detail is something that you want to be able to use in your own writing. And then you want to be able to develop these particular points. So what you want to do is something like what we see on page 67, where we're told that we have to develop points. And this is somebody who has written on the bottom, page 67, eternal youth? No thanks. I wouldn't want to be a teenager again. First of all, because I wouldn't want to worry about talking to girls. I still remember how scary it was to call up a girl and ask her out. My heart would race, my pulse would pound, and perspiration would trickle down my face, adding to my acne by the second. I never knew whether my voice would come out deep and masculine like a television anchorman's, or squeaky like a little boy's. Then there were the questions. Would she be at home? If she was, would she want to talk to me? And if she did, what would I say? The one time I did get up the nerve to take a girl in my hometown or in my homeroom to a movie, I was so tongue-tied that I stared silently at the box of popcorn in my lap until the feature finally started. Needless to say, I wasn't the best company. So basically, what we've got are some good examples of details. Now, think of that in contrast to this, terrors of my teenage years. I wouldn't want to be a teenager again. First of all, because I wouldn't want to worry about talking to girls. Calling up a girl to ask her out was something I was completely dreading. I didn't know what words to express or how to express them. I'd have all the symptoms of nervousness when I got on the phone. I worried a great deal about how I would sound and had a lot of doubts about girls' reactions. Once I managed to call up a girl to go out, but the evening turned out to be a disaster. I was too unsure of myself to act in a confident way. I couldn't think of anything to say and just kept quiet. Now that I look back on it, I really made a fool out of myself. Agonizing over my attempts at relationships with the opposite sex made adolescence a very uncomfortable time. And while both of these are decent, the first is obviously much more detailed so that we can picture the kind of anxiety that this person experienced. So again, think about this with your writing. Now, when we are continue on thinking about supporting a thesis, the points that I wanted to draw your attention to would be on page 75, where there is an activity 15 on page 75, that what they're doing is they're giving you the 3 pieces of evidence and they want you to write the thesis statement. And so I'm just going to highlight one of these. This is the second one, where we're given 3 pieces of evidence on page 75. The actors were stiff and unbelievable is the first piece of evidence. The costumes were poorly designed is the second piece of evidence. And then the third, the plot was predictable and boring. Now, there are lots of ways we could proceed with writing a thesis statement, but one thesis statement that I could think of is that this movie was terrible. And the movie was terrible because, 1, the actors were stiff and unbelievable. 2, the costumes were poorly designed. 3, the plot was predictable and boring. Now, that's not to say that's the only thesis you could create out of this. And you might never have come up with these points in the first place, which is why I don't necessarily spend a lot of time with the activities. They're just basically there to kind of give you practice. And on page 79, they have another activity. And this is the last activity I'll talk about today. This is activity 18. And there are actually a series of examples here that were given at the top of page 79, that we are going to be given a thesis statement and then we need to come up with 3 pieces of evidence to support it. And the example they give us is we quickly spruced up the apartment before our guest arrived. And then the 3 pieces of evidence is that we hid toys and newspapers in a spare closet is number 1. Number 2, we vacuumed pet hairs off the sofa. And 3, we sprayed air freshener around the living room. So these are 3 ways in which we actually engaged in this, that we quickly spruced up the apartment before our guests arrived. Or take something like number 3 that perhaps you can relate with. There are several reasons why I put off studying. Think about that. Now, I know you never wrote that statement, but my suspicion is you've probably had some experience in your life when you've put off studying. So the idea is that you need to come up with 3 reasons. Now, all of you might come up with 3 separate reasons, but think about all of the reasons why people put off studying. First, because they're tired. That's a reason. Secondly, because they're busy. That's a reason. Thirdly, because it's difficult. That's a reason. Fourthly, because and now I've moved beyond 3 to 4th, they're having computer problems or technology issues. Fifthly, they don't have the book. And I could go on and on and on for all of the reasons why people put off studying, but you get the idea that what you want to try to do is to make a statement, a position that reasonable people could disagree about. And if you say there's several reasons why I put off studying, I'll say, no, there's no reason why you put off studying. Now, I know in some ways it sounds outlandish because it's your life, so basically you are talking about yourself. But even when you're talking about yourself, it's something that could be debated. So you need to provide the 3 reasons and then the specific details. So you don't want to just say that you're busy and that's why you put off studying. You have to talk about how you were busy, what specifically happened. So when you consider all of these things, this is where we will springboard over into actually beginning to write paragraphs, which is what we are going to be talking about over the next several classes. And this is going to be our first formal writing assignment, is writing a formal paragraph, a developed, well-written paragraph. Though certainly you can write more, you can always do more than what I'm asking for, but you can't do less. Again, I haven't distributed an assignment about this yet. This is what's coming up, so I'm just giving you a little bit of a little bit of an idea of what to expect as the semester progresses. But this is what we've been working towards: writing paragraphs and writing sentences. So what we've been talking about in terms of thesis and evidence and details, those are all parts of the paragraphs. Once we start talking about writing sentences, and we will do that soon, this is where we start talking about grammar and mechanics. So, and both are important in different ways. So that basically covers the major pieces that I wanted to talk about in the first and second steps in writing. And what you can see is that for today's attendance question, which you would answer on our class discussion form by Thursday, 9/29 at 10 a.m., I'd like you to practice writing a thesis with support. And your thesis is going to be about your biggest challenge with 3 reasons why. So write a thesis about your biggest writing challenge with 3 reasons why. So again, I want you to kind of consider your own experiences with writing, as well as think about how we could go about writing a strong position and then supporting that particular position. So that'll be your attendance question. Again, if you need additional time, just ask me for an extension. I'll be happy to do it. And we will continue on next class with the next section of the text. And we will also continue on with talking about upcoming writing assignments. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. Take care. Bye-bye.